Welcome to the Artificial Intelligence panel. I'm very pleased to be moderating this panel with two very exciting guests, Samantha and Toju. Quick presentation. So Toju is an AI program manager at Google. She's responsible for EMEA, and over the past 15 years, she's had experience across advertising, retail, not-for-profits, and tech. She designs responsible AI programs focused on the development and implementation of ethical AI frameworks at Google. She's a manager for Women in AI for the UK. She's head of Black and Brilliant AI Solutions, tech startup mentor, and a business advisor. She's also a founder of a personal development company called Vine. She's a public speaker, advocates for transparent and bias-free AI aimed at reducing systemic injustices and furthering equality, and ensures responsible AI frameworks are applied to developing AI technologies. Samantha is the co-founder and CIO of IMMO, a technology-led residential real estate platform creating portfolios of single-family rentals at scale, which she founded upon leaving Blackstone. IMMO provides investors with end-to-end solutions for sourcing and portfolio management, and they operate with a data-first mindset. Their underwriting process and investment recommendations are highly automated. And finally, I'm Alex Perrin. I'm head of ventures at XTX Ventures, which is the VC arm of XTX Markets. For those who haven't heard of XTX Markets, we're an algorithmic trading firm using machine learning to trade across different asset classes. We were founded around 7 years ago. We now trade around $300 billion daily across different asset classes, including 20% of overall European equities volumes. And we're a top 3 liquidity provider in FX globally. 3 years ago, we started a venture arm. Since then, we've invested in about 30 different companies across healthcare, self-driving cars, agriculture, and even advertising. And we leverage our ML expertise to better identify, due diligence, and support companies with machine learning as a core technology. I joined as head of ventures a little bit over a year ago, and since I've been focusing on strengthening our role in supporting the UK deep tech ecosystem. Okay, so let's start with a couple of questions. So Toju, you're a strong advocate for transparent and bias-free AI. I also believe that investors, entrepreneurs, and developers involved in driving AI innovation have a responsibility to shape AI in an ethical way. How could the people in this room, including me, learn more about responsible AI?
Right. So I'll say, let's start off with what responsible AI is in the first place. It's basically what it means. How do you drive ML and AI systems, build them in a more responsible manner? And I don't know how much most of you here follow the space, but there's lots of headlines over the past couple of years on how terrible AI has been to people in society, especially people from marginalized groups. So I can give one example. We had Amazon who pulled out a hiring algorithm a couple of years ago because it was found out that it was biased towards women as opposed to men. So anytime it saw a woman's CV, it dropped the CV and it was only putting forward the men's CVs based on the keywords that were in that algorithm. So that's one of the examples of, I call them irresponsible AI or AI gone wrong, or the challenges in AI. AI and responsible AI, I put it in about 3 different buckets. We have a lot of issues with transparency. We have a lot of issues with bias. We have a lot of issues with safety, privacy, and security. And there are lots of frameworks that are out there that people are coupling together, and I'm coupling together as well to educate people, especially people working in the field who are building the ML systems, on how you can build these ML systems in a more responsible manner, thinking about the people and the impact it could have on society, and making sure that these black boxes are a little bit more transparent. There's some form of documentation like data sheets and data cards and model cards that you can provide not just to yourselves, but to regulation when they come breathing down your neck, to show a bit more transparency in how the systems or the products came up with the decisions that they made.
Now, where do we actually find these frameworks, and how can companies implement them?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So it's a very new and nascent field. I think just putting an ear out. so far, that's what's happening, right? So we do have a few companies that come up with different frameworks. So like you have Microsoft and you have IBM, and they have a few different tools out there. And the thing is, people are developing new research every day. So those tools may be a little bit old, it could be like a year old. I'm not saying their tools are old. I'm just saying that these things were published about 2 years ago, and there's still new research that's coming out every day. That said, shameless plug, I'm writing a book on the same topic, breaking out the frameworks that I've observed, right, working in my role in Google and things I've seen out there. But apart from that, the only way people can educate themselves so far is reading up on the space. We have a few newsletters like the AI Ethics newsletter, that talks a lot about this. There are lots of people on responsible AI on Twitter that talk a lot about this. And attending events like this is one good way to educate yourselves. And I think with time, there's lots of work on governance. So before you even start thinking about a responsible AI framework, you want to make sure that you have AI principles in place. And what are these AI principles? It's saying things like you're not going to develop any products or models that will affect people, drive any inequality or discriminate against people, or you're not going to develop anything that will be used for weapons of mass destruction, things like that. That's always the first thing. And then the next steps, think about how do you actually implement these different principles that you have.
And so who inside the company, how do you implement those safeguards? Is it like a compliance officer, or is it actually kind of the AI development team? Or is there a person that should be specifically dedicated to implementing these frameworks?
So I think it's best to start with a governance body. So if you have the AI principles, normally the governance bodies develop these principles along with the research team, or, the ML scientists and engineers who can feed input on the latest principles that are out there. But you want to have a governance body. You want to have legal teams very involved in this, coming up with different legal restrictions and requirements on how to pursue these. And then, of course, depends on how much noise you want to make about it. You want to have your PR teams involved as well. So you have a form of an AI narrative of how your company wants to approach these things. Enforcement comes from the governance, but you need the tooling and the right tools and frameworks, and that comes from the research teams. Like in the case of Google, it's usually from the research teams, but it's usually from the teams of people who are actually working in the field and are developing different ideas and solutions towards the field. So the example I gave about Amazon's algorithm and the hiring tool that was AI gone wrong, the person who discovered the problem was a researcher. And you find out that all these gory stories out there, many times it's always researchers that actually just prod the data sets, and then they find out all the problems with it, and they make some noise, go to the tech journalists, who I call the accountable people who keep big tech and all the tech companies on their toes, and they splash it all out, and then at the end of the day, the company pulls the data set back or pulls the offending tool back, and on it goes. So it's usually very good to be involved with the research teams who understand what's happening and can come up with different solutions, new solutions, with upcoming issues. But the governance teams need to make sure that these things are implemented across the company.
So you're saying the research teams kind of discover these biases, but aren't they also kind of responsible for identifying, the training data originally, and even, I guess biases could be reduced by introducing some kind of synthetic data, and so how could you kind of fix that? Is it like a greater collaboration between these research teams, which are given kind of a lot of freedom in the way they're sourcing the data or developing the products, and maybe reduce, the scope of the freedom of the data they're choosing?
Yeah, I think there are different ways of looking at it, but you have researchers who are focused in AI development, and you have researchers who are focused on responsible AI. And the responsible AI field is multidisciplinary. So you have people from sociology, from legal backgrounds, and it's not just ML engineers. So I think the whole point is to marry those two different groups of people together, and the responsible AI researchers should make sure, or people within the field, it doesn't have to be the researchers because they're doing research work, but people within the field should make sure that the researchers who are building those models are aware of the responsible AI frameworks or programs in place, and they can think a little bit more ethically while developing the models. So I think that's always like the best thing, is just like a lot of education within the fields of people, the industry of people who are working in these things. And of course, we talk about diversity. It's a major problem as well, because, if the teams that were building these ML models in the first place were diverse, some of the problems that we have today would not exist, because they will think about the problems that relate to people from where they're from, right? If I'm not Asian and I've never lived in India, for instance, I would never understand the issues that tuk-tuk could have, or the issues women face in India. And a good example, there's lots of research that shows that, the data coming from India is not comprehensive, because 60% of the women in India are not on the internet. So they're not representing women on the internet. So imagine if you're building data sets and products from using data sets from that region in the world, it's not going to be comprehensive. And then these issues come up across again.
Thank you. And so, but we can also see that, AI is becoming, has always kind of been very strategic for large nations, even the government level. But there's still very little kind of governing bodies regulating that. We're starting to see the first kind of AI ethics bills in the US that, give some guidance, but actually when you read through it, it's very vague still. So what do you think, would be the next step for to have like kind of some governing bodies we could refer to implement these frameworks, and that are setting kind of an example?
Yeah. I mean, we have the EU AI Act coming out in a couple of years' time. So that's the first thing that's keeping a lot of people on their toes. It's great. I feel sometimes these regulations that come up across, it's not easy to implement them, right? And they're not very granular. And that's where the problem lies. It's good to give a lot of guidelines and say you make sure that your AI does not discriminate against people, or make sure you do not use facial recognition for harm and all of that. But the question is how, right? And that's where the responsible AI frameworks come into play. But it's a good starting point. I think the main problem, though, is we'll never have a global AI framework. We'll never have a global AI regulation. And the EU Act will work for companies who are either exported into the EU or based here. But what of the companies over in like China and stuff, right? Who we still tend to use apps from China. I know they do have regulatory bodies coming up, but the question is, how comprehensive are they? How comprehensive are all the different regulations in the world? Are they all going to speak the same language? Is it the same thing? And then the next question is, even for the regulations that exist in the EU, will they be appropriate for the global south, right? Because that's a whole different geographical region with different problems. And there's lots of talk as well from researchers who are saying that the responsible AI frameworks are probably a bit more westernized and it represents colonization again, because, it's just for a certain group of people for the West. I believe that let's start from somewhere anyway. Let's start off from somewhere, and then we can think about fine-tuning it for the rest of the audiences across the world.
Okay, thank you very much, Toju. So shifting to Samantha. So Samantha, your company, IMMO, is a great example of a company leveraging data to drive investment decisions. So I understand you built IMMO with a data-first mindset. So what led you to start IMMO, and how does your investment process differ from other real estate investment platforms? Is it comparable to some of the work you were doing at Blackstone?
Yeah, so maybe if I'll address that point first. So, for example, no one would ever say Amazon is a retail company that's being smart with technology. They would say Amazon is a technology company and it's chosen to operate within the retail space. So that's how we view IMMO. We don't view ourselves as a real estate company trying to use tech in a smart way, which is definitely what companies like Blackstone are doing. But we view ourselves as a technology company that's chosen to operate within the real estate category. And that is fundamental because, you just compare an Amazon to, a Walmart or, a Tesco's or something like that. Everything is completely different from, culture, how you set up the business, how you approach challenges, how you create solutions. Everything is different from day one. But we set up IMMO about 5 years ago. So to just give a bit of background. So my background is I've been in the real estate world, which is a very traditional, relatively undisrupted industry. I've been in that space now for almost 20 years. And 5 years ago, set up the business because could really see that there was huge amounts of capital being allocated by institutional investors into the residential space. and they were struggling to be able to deploy that capital. They were only able to look at sort of big multifamily blocks or being able to build big sort of development schemes like you sort of see all over London, right? And they're highly, they're not very scalable ways to be able to deploy capital. And the reality is those types of projects only make up less than 2% of the residential markets. And the residential industry is the biggest asset class in the world. It's just in Europe alone, it's worth like $52 trillion. It's bigger than all of commercial real estate, equities, bonds. So it really is the biggest asset class in the world. And institutions were ignoring 98% of what is the biggest asset class in the world. And they're sitting on huge amounts of capital that they're not able to deploy. And if anyone sort of understands the sort of investor landscape, it hurts them to just sit on capital and not be able to deploy it and not have it earning income or yield or whatever it is. So we realized that with technology, we could actually, across the entire value chain of residential, everything from sourcing, the underwriting, and then the management and all sort of the financial management as well, we could remove those inefficiencies that currently exist within the granular 98% of the asset class. And that is individual apartments and houses, like what the majority of us live in, which is highly inefficient using traditional manual processes. So when you can, first of all, just using automations, you can remove a lot of those inefficiencies. But then when you can layer analytics on top of that, it's both a combination of, the sort of improving the efficiencies and then also all the insights you can get to make smarter investment decisions along the value chain. And because of that, we've started really unlocking what is the biggest asset class in the world. And we're now working with very large global institutions. We've raised about $2.5 billion to be deploying into Europe. We've sort of been going down that journey.
Thank you. And so what would you say is really kind of creating your competitive advantage? Is it the data you're able to access? Is it like very proprietary, or do you have like a team of machine learning engineers which is able to leverage that data better? Or how are you kind of creating a competitive advantage?
There's no silver bullet in this, unfortunately. So in terms of data in the real estate world is it's not clean. And it's a mess, and it's a pain. There's no sort of good companies out there really aggregating data in a way that you can then put it straight into your sort of AI models and be generating sort of outputs that you really trust. It's really on the far end of kind of dirty data. So it takes a huge amount of effort to clean up the data. We've now spent huge amounts of time cleaning up data in the various countries we operate in Europe. And from what we hear of people in the market, our data sets are now some of the cleanest sort of real estate data. But even then, we still don't fully trust them. And we very much need to complement it with both proprietary data sets, but obviously proprietary data sets take a long time to build up, especially in an asset class or an industry like real estate. It's not like the equity markets where there's like, thousands or millions of trades happening around the world every single day, and you've got all that data. Real estate is slow moving. So there's a limit to how quickly you can generate that proprietary data, unfortunately. So it is a combination of then layering on proprietary data and then layering on, human subjectivity still.
And so you're building these models in-house?
Yes.
Okay, and so overall, you're taking some of the subjective decisions, human decisions, a little bit out of the equation, right?
Yeah.
And so how do you see kind of this evolving in the future? Do you think like real estate will be driven by models rather than subjective decisions?
So on the residential side, eventually. So like I said, we start off with, the sort of data we've cleaned up, proprietary data, and then there's the human pieces. As we build up more of that proprietary data and we can begin to rely on it, the human sort of involvement reduces and can then focus on areas where we don't necessarily have that proprietary data, and they're sort of providing that sense check. So yes, we're definitely moving in that direction of being as, fully automated when it comes to a lot of the investment decisions. At the moment now, we're about 80-90% automated. So it's still, we've made huge strides. But then there's a big difference between like the commercial real estate world and the residential world. The residential world is so granular. And because of that, the opportunity is that there is there's such a huge volume and frequency of data being generated relative to, commercial real estate. So I honestly think commercial real estate is going to take a lot longer to generate the same level of data points. As an example, typically buildings in London, they're like 100 million, 200 million, 300 million pounds. They're so expensive. And you can allocate 300 million into an investment, and you've potentially got one tenant occupying that entire building for 15 years, and maybe there's a couple of rent reviews every 5 years. There's hardly any data points, to be able to do much there. Whereas residential, you put that same like 300 million into residential granular stock, everything from properties that are £100,000 up to, I don't know, £400,000. And then you've got tenants churning, every 12 months to 24 months. The volume of data you can generate is significant, but it's still nowhere close to the volumes you can generate in other financial sectors.
Great, thank you very much. About taking the human out of the equation, maybe, we've seen some incredible advances in like text-to-image models, such as DALL-E, Stable Diffusion, and others. Toju, how do you think this will kind of impact creative industries? Is this like the end of photography, design, traditional photo editing apps like Photoshop, or even like image banks like Getty or Shutterstock?
Yeah, it's a good question. It reminds me, I feel technology is just it's very important in our lives. And I think we just need to embrace it. So when people, go, AI is terrible, let's not use it. I'm like, yeah, when cars came about, people said, no, we don't want to use cars. They're going to kill everybody. So I think we need to adjust to the times. It's just thinking about how do we do it in an ethical and responsible manner. A few artists love these new text-to-image models. They embrace them. It's usually the digital artists because I think they see the value of it, right? It's making their work much quicker, much easier. And the traditional human artists don't like it because they feel like, these things are coming to steal our jobs away. I do say, it's always good to have a USP, understand what your unique selling point is. I can give an example now. DALL-E, OpenAI images, the Google's Imagen and Party. These are very great images, but I've not seen them put in any gallery yet, right? And the question is, will they really be good enough for people to actually pay millions of pounds to just buy an image that an AI system generated because, someone just asked an AI to show a man sitting on Mars licking an ice cream, and they produce that, and then someone thinks that they actually have the proprietary rights to print that out and sell it for £500. I don't see that happening. And probably that's where the human art will have the upper hand over these AI generated systems. That said, AI technology is advancing every single day, right? And we're going to see more of this. And the question is, how do we protect different industries? At the same time, how do we include flexibility and adjustments to the incoming technologies that are coming into play? So long and short of it, it might replace a few jobs, but again, a human artist should be very good at what they do, understand what the USP is. If it means they want to get into galleries as opposed to just fighting with technology, they should do it. At the end of the day, this is just tech. And I still feel that humans, it depends on what industry, but I still feel that humans still have that advantage over tech. And at the end of the day, we're the ones creating it. So it shouldn't really come around and take over our lives and our jobs, really.
Thank you. And I guess that kind of brings us also to kind of another example, which is these large language models such as GPT-3. Social networks already kind of struggle with fake accounts, misinformation. How do you see the emergence of these tools accessible to all, impacting the content we consume?
Yeah, no, it's a very good point. I think the large models are the tricky ones, right? That's where the devil is in the detail, and that's where the devil really lies, is those large models, because they're being fed data from the internet, and the internet represents society. And because they're so large and they're taught with unsupervised learning, they just kind of like churn out their own output, and we don't know what they're going to say. So that's scary, especially when we're talking about large models. That's scary. So, but again, it goes back to the responsible AI frameworks, right? It's like, how do you identify the harms in these models? And do you have any mitigations for the harms? So, for example, a chatbot could actually pretend that it's a human, right, and say things that border on anthropomorphism or sentience. And we've seen examples of that. And anyone who's developing this model should be ready for these sort of things. You should be able to understand the different harms that existed in large language models, especially chatbots, if that's one of the use cases that the model is designed to do. Also think about the downstream tasks. So how many other places could this model be adopted in, and what sort of things could it be used for? And what are the potential harms it could have on people? So if you're a chatbot and the chatbot is chatting with someone and someone probably says, I hate my life, I want to commit suicide, you should have been able to have done some testing, adversarial testing, on the component of safety to make sure that that sort of response, the chatbot doesn't give that sort of response, because a chatbot could say, go kill yourself, jump into the River Thames. No one loves you anyway, right? Or the chatbot could say, I'm not qualified to say anything, but maybe you should go see a psychologist or go for therapy or just go grab a drink or something, right? So it's making sure that whatever chatbot, whatever AI system any company is developing, you have premeditated sort of responses that it brings out by doing adversarial prompts, testing for the responses, and having different safety classifiers, which is something that you can build in your trained models. And of course, you want to fine-tune your models, right, and keep on testing them. And then the humans in the loop process is very important, right, where you have the right humans, right raters annotating the data sets and having labels. And you also mentioned synthetic data. That's a good one that could actually be used. And of course, you want to think about privacy. There's so many cases where you've heard about people's models and apps just spitting out people's personal identifiable information, which is really crazy. I'm so glad that lives have not been lost yet, but we don't know what the future could be like. So you want to make sure that you anonymize your data. You're using very strong privacy methods like federated learning. There's so many things out there that you could use. The data is really protected. You have the right people who have access to the data. But thinking about the responsible AI framework on a whole holistic scale, and making sure that once you're ready to launch that model, you have done the due diligence to make sure that it works. Excuse me. I always have frogs in my throat that always come up when I speak. Unfortunately, I don't have water here. But that's the whole idea, right? Is okay. All right, frogs go down. Yeah, they listened. No, they didn't. But yeah, that's the whole point. It's just making sure that you have these different frameworks in place, right? Looking at it from a holistic view of safety, again, privacy, security, fairness, transparency, explainability, and walking through the different principles that you have put in place and looking for the right tools that you can use. And there are lots of tools out there as well. Like I mentioned, Microsoft, IBM, Google, they have a lot of tools. So it's bringing them together and just premeditating any launches before you launch your models.
Mm-hmm. So you're also saying that it would be shaped to answer in a certain way. And so if there's someone shaping it, I guess there's some like subjective input going into that, which could be, used to shape, global thinking or so it's actually a very important point where, I think like those models should probably be quite transparent or open source in the way they're taking their decisions. But yeah, okay.
100%. And don't put them on Twitter. That's one thing I'll say, especially if it's a large language model. I don't know if you heard about Microsoft's Tay that came out in 2016. It lasted for only 16 hours because and Facebook did something quite similar with OPT3B. But Microsoft had Tay, said, go learn from Twitter. You're going to learn from the speech on Twitter. And within 16 hours, Tay was just spitting out anti-Semitism and racist slurs and everything else and was supporting Hitler and all of that. And Microsoft had to pull the plug. So the question is, it's great to have large language models. It's great to have them out there to learn, but know that human society, especially Twitter, is full of hate speech. You don't want, unless you're building a hate speech classifier, right? Something that is supposed to be like for adversarial testing. That's the only way you should do that. But for things like, you want to actually create a chatbot that is nice and kind, don't put it on Twitter.
Great, thank you very much, Samantha, Toju. It was great to have you here today. And closing the panel. Thanks.
All right, thank you.